David's phone buzzed for the third time during his morning meeting. He glanced at the screen and saw his neighbor's number. His stomach dropped. This couldn't be good news. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," he told his business partners, stepping away from the conference table. "Hello? David, I hate to bother you at work again," came Mrs. Peterson's worried voice. "But Alex is having another meltdown. He's been crying for 20 minutes straight, and Lisa she packed her bags and left." David closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. That was the third nanny in 6 months. The third person who couldn't handle his 4-year-old son's difficulties. The third time he'd have to leave work early and figure out what to do next. "I'll be right there," he said quietly. The drive home felt longer than usual. David's mind raced through his options, but the list was getting shorter each time. Good nannies were hard to find, and word was getting around that the Thompson household was a tough assignment. Alex wasn't a bad kid, he was actually sweet and funny when he felt safe. But ever since losing his mother 2 years ago, bedtime had become a nightmare. The crying fits could last for hours. The fear of being alone in his room. The way he'd wake up screaming from bad dreams almost every night. David understood why the nannies left. He really did. It was exhausting, and they weren't getting paid enough to deal with a traumatized child. But understanding didn't make it any easier when he had to choose between his son and his business responsibilities. When he pulled into his driveway, he could see Mrs. Peterson through her kitchen window, holding Alex on her lap. The elderly woman had been a godsend these past 2 years, always ready to help in emergencies. But she was 83 and couldn't be expected to chase after a 4-year-old on a regular basis. "Daddy." Alex ran to him the moment he walked through Mrs. Peterson's door. His little face was red and puffy from crying. "Hey, buddy." David knelt down and pulled his son into a tight hug. "I heard you had a tough morning." "Lisa was mean," Alex sniffled. "She said I was being a baby." David's jaw tightened. He made a mental note to never use that nanny agency again. "You're not a baby, Alex. You're my big boy, remember?" Mrs. Peterson handed David a cup of coffee and shook her head sadly. "She seemed nice enough when she arrived this morning. But when Alex started getting upset about you leaving, she just lost patience, said she couldn't handle problem children and stormed out." Problem children. Those words hit David like a punch to the gut. His son wasn't a problem, he was hurting. There was a difference. After thanking Mrs. Peterson and promising to find a solution soon, David took Alex home. The rest of the day was spent trying to work from his laptop while keeping his son entertained. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than leaving Alex with someone who didn't understand him. That evening, after finally getting Alex to sleep around midnight, David sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open. The internet was flooded with nanny services and babysitting websites. He'd tried most of them already. The good ones had waiting lists months long. The affordable ones seemed to only last a few weeks before quitting. His business partner, Mike, had offered to help him find someone through his connections. But David was tired of explaining Alex's situation over and over. Tired of seeing that look in people's eyes when they realized this wasn't going to be an easy job. Around 2 in the morning, David found himself on a different kind of website, one that specialized in caregivers for children with special needs. Maybe that's what Alex needed. Someone who understood trauma and loss, not just someone who could make lunch and watch cartoons. He scrolled through profiles of certified therapists and specialized childcare workers. They all looked perfect on paper, with impressive qualifications and glowing reviews. They also cost 3 times what he was currently paying, and most required long-term contracts he wasn't sure he could commit to. Just as he was about to close the laptop and try to get some sleep, a simple profile caught his attention. Carmen Rodriguez. No fancy photo, no long list of certificates, just a basic description. Experienced with children of all ages, comfortable with difficult situations, available immediately. Her rates were reasonable, not the cheapest he'd seen, but not the most expensive either. What struck him was the last line of her profile. Every child deserves patience and understanding. David clicked on her contact information. There wasn't much there, just an email address and a phone number. No reviews, no references posted online. Normally, this would be a red flag, but something about the simplicity of her profile felt honest. He sent a brief email explaining his situation, trying not to sound too desperate, even though he absolutely was. He mentioned Alex's age, the sleep issues, and the fact that previous nannies had found the position challenging. He tried to be upfront without scaring her away before they even met. To his surprise, Carmen replied within an hour, even though it was nearly 3 in the morning. Mr. Thompson, I understand your situation is difficult. I have experience with children who are dealing with loss and trauma. I'm available to meet tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to discuss the position. Carmen David read the email 3 times. She didn't ask for details about his son's problems. She didn't mention her qualifications or demand to know exactly what kind of challenges she'd be facing. She just said she understood and was available to help. The next morning, Alex woke up asking about Lisa. David explained that Lisa wouldn't be coming back, which led to another round of tears and questions about whether Daddy was going to leave too. It broke David's heart every time. No matter how many times he promised he wasn't going anywhere, Alex still worried about being abandoned. We're going to meet someone new today, David told his son over breakfast. Her name is Carmen, and she might be able to help take care of you when Daddy has to work. Alex pushed his cereal around his bowl. Is she going to be mean too? I don't think so, buddy. But if she is, she won't stay. I promise. That afternoon, Carmen arrived exactly on time. David watched from his window as she parked her small older car and walked up to his front door. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She dressed plainly, jeans and a clean sweater, and carried herself with quiet confidence. When he opened the door, Carmen smiled politely and extended her hand. Mr. Thompson? I'm Carmen Rodriguez. Thank you for meeting with me. Her handshake was firm and her voice was calm and steady. There was something reassuring about her presence, though David couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. Please, call me David, come in. Alex peeked around the corner from the living room. Curious about the visitor but too shy to come closer, David could see his son's small face watching them from behind the couch. Alex is a bit cautious with new people, David explained as he led Carmen to the kitchen table. He's been through a lot with the previous nannies. Carmen nodded calmly. That's completely normal. Trust takes time to build. David appreciated that she didn't immediately try to coax Alex over or make a big show of being friendly. Too many of the other candidates had done that, which usually made Alex retreat even further. They sat down, and David launched into his usual explanation about Alex's challenges. The sleepless nights, the crying fits, the way bedtime had become a 2-hour battle every single evening. He watched Carmen's face carefully, waiting for that familiar look of doubt or concern that meant another potential nanny was about to back out. But Carmen just listened. She didn't interrupt with questions about pay or ask how long the previous nannies had lasted. When David finished talking, she was quiet for a moment. What time does Alex usually go to bed? She asked. Well, I try for 8 o'clock, but it usually doesn't happen until 10 or 11, sometimes later. And what's his routine like during the day? David realized he didn't have a great answer. It depends. Some days Mrs. Peterson watches him. Other days I work from home. There hasn't been much consistency lately. Carmen made a few notes on a small pad she'd pulled from her purse. Children do better with predictable schedules, she said matter-of-factly. Especially children who've experienced loss. The way she said it wasn't critical, just observational. David found himself relieved that she seemed to understand Alex's situation, without him having to explain every detail. When would you be able to start? He asked. Tomorrow, if needed. David blinked. You don't want to think about it? Ask about references or background checks. I assume you'll want to run a background check, and I can provide references if you'd like. But you need help now, and I'm available. There was something refreshingly straightforward about her response. No games, no negotiation tactics, just a simple offer to help when help was needed. They agreed on her hours and pay, and Carmen said she'd arrive at 7:30 the next morning. As she prepared to leave, Alex finally emerged from his hiding spot. Are you going to be my new babysitter? He asked quietly. Carmen knelt down to his eye level but kept a respectful distance. I'm Carmen. Your dad and I talked about me helping take care of you. What do you think about that? Alex shrugged, a response David had become very familiar with. Will you be nice? I'll do my best, Carmen replied honestly. And if I do something you don't like, you can always tell your dad. It wasn't the enthusiastic reassurancy most adults gave children, but Alex seemed to appreciate the honesty. He nodded solemnly and went back to his cartoons. The next morning, Carmen arrived at exactly 7:29. David was impressed by her punctuality. especially after dealing with nannies who showed up whenever they felt like it. She came prepared with a small notebook and asked David to walk her through Alex's typical morning routine. As he explained how he usually handled breakfast, getting dressed, and the ongoing battle over toothbrushing, Carmen took notes. "I'll handle the morning routine," she said. "You can get ready for work without worrying about Alex." David felt a mixture of relief and guilt. It had been so long since he'd been able to get ready for work in peace. But he also worried about leaving Alex with someone so new. "His favorite cereal is the one with the cartoon character on the box," David offered. "And he likes his toast cut into triangles, not squares." Carmen nodded and wrote it down. "Anything else I should know?" "He might ask for his mom," David said quietly. "Sometimes he forgets she's not coming back. I don't really know what to say." "I understand," Carmen replied simply. That first week, David was amazed by how smoothly things went. Every morning, he'd come downstairs to find Alex already dressed and eating breakfast. No crying, no arguments about clothes or food. Carmen would have his lunch packed and his backpack ready for the few activities they had planned. She left detailed notes each day, written in neat handwriting on index cards. Alex ate all his breakfast, played with blocks for 45 minutes, read 3 books, lunch at noon, finished most of his sandwich. Afternoon nap from 1:30 to 2:45. No major difficulties. The notes were helpful, but they felt so clinical. David found himself wanting to know more. Did Alex laugh at anything? Did he ask questions? What did they talk about during those long afternoon hours? When he asked Carmen about it, she gave him the same straightforward responses. "He's adjusting well to the routine. No behavioral issues today. He ate better than yesterday. It was professional and competent." But David couldn't help comparing it to Alex's previous nanny, Jenny, who used to tell him stories about funny things Alex said or cute things he did. Carmen seemed more like a caregiver than someone who actually enjoyed spending time with his son, but the results were undeniable. Alex stopped having meltdowns when David left for work. The morning routine became smooth and predictable. Even more surprising, Alex started going to bed closer to his actual bedtime. "How do you do it?" David asked Carmen one evening as she prepared to leave. "The bedtime thing has been impossible for 2 years. Consistency," she replied, gathering her things. "Same routine every night. Bath at 7, pajamas, brush teeth, story time, lights out at 8. Children need structure." David nodded, though he wondered why it had been so hard for him to maintain that structure. Maybe because Alex's crying and resistance had worn him down over time. It was easier to give in than to fight the same battle every night. What bothered David most was that Alex didn't seem particularly attached to Carmen. He didn't run to greet her in the mornings or get upset when she left. It was like she was just another part of his daily routine, like brushing his teeth or eating lunch. The previous nannies had all tried to be Alex's friend, which usually backfired when they couldn't handle the difficult moments. But Carmen kept a professional distance that felt almost cold. She was kind but not warm, helpful but not loving. David told himself this was probably better. Less emotional attachment meant less trauma when things didn't work out. Alex had been through enough disappointment with caregivers who promised to stick around and then left when things got tough. Still, something about Carmen's detachment nagged at him. She was excellent at her job, but she seemed to view it as exactly that, just a job. Alex was a task to be managed rather than a child to be cared for. 3 weeks into Carmen's employment, David realized Alex had gone an entire week without asking about his mother. The daily tears had stopped. The bedtime battles were over. His son was eating better, sleeping better, and seemed more settled than he'd been in months. So why did David feel like something was missing? Maybe it was because he barely knew anything about Carmen beyond her competence. She arrived on time, did her job perfectly, and left without sharing details about her life or asking about theirs. She was the most professional nanny they'd ever had, but also the most distant. David wondered if this was what Alex needed right now, someone steady and reliable who wouldn't complicate his emotions or make promises she might not keep. But part of him missed seeing his son light up around someone who cared about him. Carmen was solving all their practical problems, but David couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing from the equation. David's friend Mike called him during lunch break, sounding more serious than usual. "Have you seen the news today?" Mike asked without his usual small talk. "No, I've been in meetings all morning. Why?" There's a story about a nanny in Portland who was caught on camera being rough with a 2-year-old. The parents only found out because they installed a hidden camera. David felt his stomach tighten. That's terrible. I know Carmen seems great, but David, you barely know her. She doesn't talk much, doesn't share anything about her background. Don't you think that's a little strange? After hanging up, David couldn't focus on his afternoon meetings. Mike's words kept echoing in his head. It was true that Carmen remained a mystery even after working for them for over a month. She arrived precisely at 7:30 each morning, did her job flawlessly, and left at exactly 6 o'clock. She never stayed for casual conversation, never mentioned friends or family, never shared stories about her past jobs. Most of the previous nannies had been chatty, telling David about their weekend plans or asking about his work. Carmen answered his questions politely but never volunteered information about herself. He didn't even know where she lived. That evening, David paid closer attention to the interaction between Carmen and Alex. She was patient and gentle, following Alex's bedtime routine exactly as they'd established. But there was something almost mechanical about it. She read him a story in the same calm, measured tone she used for everything else. When Alex asked for one more book, she simply said, "One story is what we agreed on," and turned off the light. Alex didn't argue, which David had initially seen as a good thing. But now he wondered if Alex had learned not to ask for more because Carmen never showed flexibility or warmth. After Carmen left, David found himself questioning everything. Was Alex really doing better, or had he just learned to comply with Carmen's strict routine? Was the lack of emotional outbursts a sign of healing, or was Alex just shutting down? The next morning, David noticed something he'd missed before. When Carmen arrived, Alex barely looked up from his cereal. No excited greeting, no smile, just a quiet good morning when prompted. It was so different from how Alex used to light up when Jenny arrived, even though that relationship had ended badly. During his lunch break, David found himself Googling nanny cameras on his phone. The search results were full of stories about parents discovering troubling behavior they never would have known about otherwise. There were also plenty of articles about cameras revealing wonderful nannies who went above and beyond when parents weren't around. David felt guilty even looking at the websites. Carmen had given him no reason to doubt her. Alex was thriving under her care, sleeping better than he had since his mother died. The house ran smoothly and David's work stress had decreased significantly. But Mike's words haunted him. What did he really know about the woman who spent 8 hours a day alone with his son? That weekend, Alex seemed quieter than usual. When David suggested they go to the park, Alex shrugged and said, "Carmen says parks are germy places where kids get sick." David frowned. "Carmen said that?" "She says lots of places have germs. She likes it better when we stay inside and do quiet activities." David made a mental note to ask Carmen about this, but when he brought it up on Monday morning, she had a perfectly reasonable explanation. "I prefer controlled environments, especially during flu season," she said. "Alex's immune system is probably compromised from stress and poor sleep patterns. Indoor activities are safer and more educational." It made sense, but David remembered how much Alex used to love the playground. Now his son seemed content to spend hours coloring or doing puzzles, never asking to go outside. The breaking point came when David picked Alex up early one day for a doctor's appointment. He walked into the house quietly, not wanting to startle them if they were napping. He could hear Carmen's voice from the living room, but it sounded different from her usual tone. Warmer somehow. David paused in the hallway listening. Carmen was reading to Alex, but her voice had an almost musical quality he'd never heard before. Alex was giggling at something, a sound David realized he hadn't heard much lately. When David entered the room, Carmen's voice immediately returned to its usual professional tone. Alex's laughter stopped and he looked almost guilty, as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Daddy," Alex said, but without his usual enthusiasm. "Carmen was reading me the funny voice book." "The funny voice book?" David asked, looking at Carmen. "We were just reading," Carmen replied simply, "closey. Nang the picture book. Alex, it's time to get ready for your appointment." During the car ride to the doctor, Alex was unusually chatty. "Carmen does the best voices for the characters," he told David. "She makes the dragon sound scary, but not too scary. And she knows songs about all the animals in my picture books." David was surprised. Carmen had never mentioned anything about doing character voices or knowing children's songs. In fact, she'd seemed almost uncomfortable the few times David had asked about story time. That evening, after much internal debate, David ordered a small nanny cam online. He told himself it was just for peace of mind, a way to confirm that Carmen was as good as she seemed. He'd seen the positive changes in Alex, but something about Carmen's behavior when she thought no one was watching made him curious. The camera arrived 3 days later in a small, discreet package. It looked like a regular picture frame but had a hidden camera that could record video to a smartphone app. David felt uncomfortable setting it up, but he reminded himself that it was his house and his child. He placed it on Alex's bookshelf, angled to capture most of the room where Carmen usually read stories and played with Alex. The frame held a photo of Alex and his mother, which somehow made David feel even more conflicted about the whole thing. For the first few days, David didn't check the footage. Having the camera there was enough to ease his anxiety. Carmen continued her usual routine, and Alex seemed happy enough. David almost forgot about the camera entirely. Then Carmen got sick. She called early Tuesday morning, her usually composed voice hoarse and weak. "I'm sorry for the short notice, but I've caught some kind of flu. I don't want to risk getting Alex sick." David had to scramble to find coverage, eventually calling in a favor with Mrs. Peterson. As he worked from home that day, helping his elderly neighbor manage Alex's energy, he realized how much he'd come to depend on Carmen's quiet competence. Alex asked about Carmen several times throughout the day. "When is Carmen coming back? Is Carmen okay? Can we call Carmen?" The question surprised David. If Alex was truly indifferent to Carmen, why was he so concerned about her absence? When Carmen returned 2 days later, Alex ran to greet her at the door, the first time David had seen him show that kind of enthusiasm for her arrival. "I missed you," Alex told her simply. Carmen paused, and David thought he saw something shift in her expression. But then she smiled politely and said, "I'm glad to be back. Let's get you some breakfast." That evening, David finally decided to check some of the camera footage from before Carmen got sick. He told himself he'd just watch a few minutes, enough to confirm that everything was normal. He was curious about the gap between Carmen's professional demeanor around him and the warmth Alex seemed to experience when they were alone. The funny voices, the songs Alex mentioned, none of it matched the reserved woman David interacted with each day. As he pulled up the app on his phone that night, David felt nervous. Part of him hoped he'd see exactly what he expected: Carmen efficiently managing Alex's day with the same professional competence she showed when David was around, but another part of him hoped to see something more. Some sign that the woman caring for his son had the warmth and affection that Alex seemed to crave, even if she kept it hidden from David. He selected a file from the previous Friday evening, right around bedtime. The timestamp showed 7:45 p.m., right after bath time, when Carmen usually read Alex his bedtime story. David pressed play and waited to see what Carmen was really like when she thought no one was watching. David sat on his couch with his phone, feeling like he was about to invade his own privacy. The timestamp on the video showed 7:45 p.m. from the previous Friday. He remembered that evening. He'd been working late in his home office finishing up a presentation while Carmen handled Alex's bedtime routine. He pressed play and watched the familiar scene unfold. There was Alex's bedroom, dimly lit by the small lamp on his nightstand. Alex was already in his pajamas, sitting cross-legged on his bed while Carmen arranged his stuffed animals around him. At first, everything looked exactly as David expected. Carmen moved efficiently, straightening Alex's covers and placing his water cup on the nightstand. Her movements were precise and purposeful, just like always. "Which book tonight?" David heard Carmen ask in her usual calm voice. Alex pointed to a picture book about forest animals. David had read that same book dozens of times. It was one of Alex's favorites, though David had never understood why. The story was simple and the illustrations were nice enough, but nothing special. Carmen sat down in the chair beside Alex's bed and opened the book. David expected to hear her read in the same measured tone she used for everything else. But as soon as she began, something changed. Deep in the forest where the tall trees grow, Carmen began, and her voice was completely different. It was warmer, more animated. She wasn't just reading the words, she was bringing them to life. David leaned forward, turning up the volume on his phone. As Carmen read about the different forest animals, she gave each one a distinct voice. The bear had a deep, rumbly sound that made Alex giggle. The rabbit spoke in a high, quick voice that had Alex covering his mouth to stifle his laughter. The wise old owl spoke slowly and importantly, which made Alex nod along as if receiving serious advice. David stared at his phone screen in amazement. This was the woman who barely made conversation with him, who answered his questions with short, professional responses. Yet here she was, completely engaged with his son, making voices and sound effects that brought the story to life. But that wasn't even the most surprising part. When Carmen finished reading, she didn't immediately close the book and say goodnight like David expected. Instead, she looked at Alex, who was snuggled deep into his covers with a content smile on his face. "Are you ready for sleep, little one?" she asked gently. Alex shook his head slightly. "I'm still a little scared," he admitted quietly. David's heart clenched. Alex never told him about being scared anymore. David had assumed the bedtime fears had passed. Carmen set the book aside and moved her chair closer to Alex's bed. "What are you scared of?" "Sometimes I dream about Mommy," Alex said in a small voice. "And then I wake up and remember she's not here anymore." David felt tears spring to his eyes. He had no idea Alex was still having these dreams. Why hadn't his son told him? Carmen was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and gently smoothed Alex's hair. "Dreams about people we love can be sad and beautiful at the same time," she said softly. "Your mommy loved you very much." "I know," Alex whispered. "But I miss her songs. She used to sing to me every night." David's breath caught in his throat. His wife Rebecca had been an amazing singer. She'd sung to Alex from the time he was a baby, making up little songs about their day or singing old lullabies her own mother had taught her. After she died, David had tried to continue the tradition, but his voice was nothing compared to hers. Eventually, he'd stopped trying and Alex had stopped asking. Carmen was still stroking Alex's hair gently. "Would you like me to sing something?" she asked. Alex nodded eagerly. What happened next took David's breath away completely. Carmen began to sing in Spanish, her voice soft and incredibly beautiful. David didn't understand the words, but the melody was hauntingly lovely. Her voice had a trained quality to it, rich and pure with perfect pitch and control. This wasn't just someone who could carry a tune. This was someone who had studied music, who understood how to use her voice as an instrument. Alex's eyes grew heavy as Carmen sang, his body relaxing into his pillow. The fear and sadness that had been in his voice moments earlier melted away, replaced by peaceful contentment. But Carmen didn't stop with one song. As Alex drifted closer to sleep, she switched to English, singing a gentle lullaby about stars and dreams and being safe through the night. Her voice wrapped around the words like a warm blanket, and David found himself getting emotional just listening to it. When Alex's breathing became deep and even, indicating he had fallen asleep, Carmen didn't immediately get up and leave. She sat there for several more minutes, watching over him with an expression David had never seen on her face before. She looked tender, protective. There was genuine affection in her eyes as she watched Alex sleep. She reached over once more to adjust his blanket, tucking it gently around his shoulders. Then she did something that broke David's heart completely. Carmen leaned down and whispered something to sleeping Alex, so quietly that David had to replay that part of the video twice to catch it. "Sweet dreams, little one," she whispered. "You are so loved, more than you know." David saw tears glistening in Carmen's eyes as she said it. She sat there for another minute just watching Alex sleep, and David could see her wiping her eyes before finally standing up and quietly leaving the room. David paused the video and sat back on his couch, stunned. Everything he thought he knew about Carmen was wrong. She wasn't cold or indifferent. She wasn't just going through the motions of caring for Alex, she was protecting herself. David realized that Carmen kept her professional distance not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. The warmth and affection she showed Alex when she thought no one was watching, that was real. The woman who sang his son to sleep with tears in her eyes wasn't just doing a job. She was loving his child. David scrolled through more video files, randomly selecting different days and times. In every single one, he saw the same thing. Carmen being playful and warm with Alex when she thought she was alone with him, making funny voices during story time, singing quietly while they did puzzles together, comforting Alex when he mentioned missing his mother, always with patience and understanding. In one video from the week Carmen was sick, David watched Alex playing alone in his room. His son kept looking toward the door and saying, "I wish Carmen was here. She makes the best voices for all my books." David's eyes filled with tears as he realized how much his son had needed this. Alex had been grieving not just for his mother, but for the comfort and tenderness that had died with her. Carmen had somehow recognized that need and filled it, giving Alex the emotional connection he craved while maintaining professional boundaries with David. But why hide it? Why pretend to be detached and clinical when she was clearly anything but? David thought about Carmen's careful professionalism, her reluctance to share personal information, the way she seemed to keep walls up around everyone except Alex. Something had happened to make her protective of her own heart, even as she opened it to his son. As he sat there in the quiet of his living room, David realized he needed to talk to Carmen. Not to confront her about the camera, that felt like a violation of the trust she'd unknowingly placed in him. But to let her know that he saw what she was doing for Alex and that he was grateful. More than that, he wanted to understand why someone with her obvious gifts was working as a nanny instead of pursuing what was clearly a professional singing career. Why did she hide her beautiful voice from the world, sharing it only with a lonely 4-year-old who needed it more than anything? David looked at his phone again, at the paused image of Carmen gently watching over his sleeping son. Tomorrow, he decided, he was going to find a way to let her know that her walls didn't need to be quite so high. Alex wasn't the only one who needed what Carmen had to offer. David was beginning to realize that he did too. David barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Carmen's beautiful voice singing to Alex, saw the tears in her eyes as she whispered words of love to his sleeping son. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He had to talk to her. Carmen arrived at exactly 7:30 as always, greeting David with her usual polite professionalism. But now David noticed things he'd missed before. The way her eyes lingered on Alex when she thought no one was looking. How her voice softened just slightly when she spoke to him. The careful distance she maintained, as if afraid to get too close. David waited until Alex was busy with his morning cartoons before approaching Carmen in the kitchen. She was packing Alex's lunch with her typical efficiency, but David could see the gentleness in how she cut his sandwich into the triangular shapes Alex preferred. "Carmen?" David began, his voice uncertain. "Can we talk for a minute?" She looked up, immediately alert. In her experience, "we need to talk" usually meant bad news. "Of course. Is everything all right with Alex?" "Alex is wonderful," David said quickly. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss." Carmen set down the sandwich and folded her hands, waiting. David realized he'd rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times, but now that he was here, he didn't know how to begin. "I heard you singing to him," David said finally. Carmen's face went completely still. For a moment, David thought she might deny it or give him some professional explanation. Instead, she looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know that's not part of my job description. If you'd prefer that I stick to just reading stories—" "No," David interrupted. "Carmen, your voice is incredible. Alex hasn't slept that peacefully since his mother died. I'm not upset that you were singing to him. I'm wondering why you never mentioned that you could." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up, David saw vulnerability in her eyes that he'd never seen before. "I don't sing anymore," she said simply. "But you do sing. I heard you." "Not really. Not the way I used to." Carmen's voice was barely above a whisper. "I only sing for Alex because he needed it. Children who've lost someone, they need comfort in ways that adults can't always provide." David leaned against the kitchen counter, giving her space but showing he wasn't going anywhere. "You sound like you speak from experience." Something in Carmen's expression cracked, and David saw years of carefully controlled pain behind her professional mask. "I had a daughter," Carmen said, the words coming out like they hurt. "Isabella. She would have been 7 this year." David's heart sank. "Would have been?" Carmen nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she continued, her voice was thick with emotion. "She had leukemia. We fought it for 2 years. I used to sing to her every day in the hospital. It was the only thing that made her smile toward the end. David felt his eyes fill with tears. Carmen, I'm so sorry. I was a professional singer before Isabella got sick, Carmen continued, as if she needed to get it all out now that she'd started. Nothing famous, but I made a good living. Weddings, events, some studio work. I loved it. But when Isabella needed me, music became just something I did for her, something to ease her pain. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. After she died, I couldn't perform anymore. Every song reminded me of her. Every stage felt empty without knowing she was listening. So I stopped. David understood now why Carmen kept such careful distance. She'd learned that loving someone meant losing them, and she was protecting herself from that pain. But you sing for Alex, he said gently. Carmen's smile was sad, but genuine. Alex reminds me of Isabella in some ways. Not how he looks, but the way children carry grief. It's different from adults. They need to know they're safe, that someone will take care of them. When I sing to Alex, it doesn't hurt the same way. It feels like Isabella would want me to help him. David was quiet for a moment, processing everything Carmen had shared. Is that why you became a nanny? To help children like Alex? Partly, Carmen said. But I'm also going back to school. Night classes, online courses. I'm studying to become a child psychologist. I want to specialize in helping children process grief and trauma. David stared at her. You're studying psychology? 3 nights a week plus weekends. I know I should have mentioned it when you hired me, but most parents don't want a nanny who's planning to leave for a different career. Are you planning to leave? David asked, surprised by how much the thought bothered him. Carmen looked uncertain. Eventually, yes. When I finish my degree, but not until I'm sure Alex doesn't need me anymore. David realized that Carmen had been giving Alex exactly what he needed, without David even understanding what that was. She'd recognized his son's grief because she carried her own. She'd known how to comfort him because she'd learned to comfort Isabella. Alex does need you, David said quietly, but maybe not in the way you think. Carmen looked puzzled. He doesn't just need a caregiver or even a therapist, David continued. He needs someone who understands what he's been through. Someone who can sing to him without it feeling like a job. Someone who loves him. David, Carmen started, but he held up his hand. I'm not asking you to give up your dreams or your studies, he said. But what if there was a way to do both? What if you could be part of our family while you're building your career? Carmen's eyes widened. I don't understand. David took a deep breath. Alex loves you, Carmen. Not just as his nanny, but as someone important in his life. And I've been so focused on keeping things professional that I didn't realize what our family was missing. He gestured toward the living room where they could hear Alex laughing at his cartoons. You've given him back his joy. He sings along with songs again. He sleeps through the night. He talks about you like your family. Carmen's eyes filled with tears again. What I'm trying to say, David continued, is that maybe we could make this work differently. You could continue your studies, maybe even do some of your practicum work with other families who need help. But you'd be part of our family too, not just our employee. Carmen was quiet for a long time, and David worried he'd pushed too hard too fast. I'm scared, she admitted finally. I lost Isabella and it nearly destroyed me. I don't know if I can risk caring that much again. David moved closer, his voice gentle. But you already do care. I see it every time you look at Alex. And he cares about you too. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not just the ones we're born into. Carmen looked toward the living room where Alex was playing. He really loves me? He asks about you when you're not here. He lights up when you arrive. He trusts you with his fears and his dreams. If that's not love, I don't know what is. A tear rolled down Carmen's cheek. I love him too. So much it scares me. Then stay, David said simply. Not as his nanny, but as part of our family. Help me figure out how to be the father Alex deserves. Let us help you heal too. Carmen wiped her eyes and looked at David with something like hope. You really think this could work? Before David could answer, Alex appeared in the kitchen doorway. Carmen, are you sad? He asked, noticing her tears. Carmen knelt down to Alex's level, and David saw her professional mask slip away completely. I'm not sad, little one. I'm happy. Good, Alex said, hugging her too.